Okay, so live now, and this is the Pacific Hermitage, monks from the Pacific Hermitage, and we are offering just a live stream so people can have some good winter reflections, Dhamma reflections. My name is Ajahn Chunda, and I trained at Abhayagiri. I think many of you know me. This is Ajahn Kovilo, and would you like to say anything?
I also trained at Abhayagiri, ordained in 2010, and have been living in Thailand for about half of my monk's life now, and just came back to America maybe in August, and have started actually going to Buddhist University. I'm going to Dharma Realm Buddhist University, which is the accredited university through City of 10,000 Buddhas, and I'm up here with Venerables, very good friends, up until mid-January, and I go back for the next semester.
I didn't think about that, how we both were away for quite a while. Cause I was away for about 6 years, and you'd come back a little bit, but yeah, and then return to our home base a bit.
Yeah, it's
Ukaya. Yeah. And we have over here Venerable Nisabho.
Hello, I'm Nisabho. I have been in Thailand for the past few years, but I spent some time at Abhayagiri. I ordained in 2012, and I'll be at the Pacific Hermitage for the next 4 months or so. So it's a pleasure to meet all of you. We're new to this technology, so forgive us. We're not as expert as Ajahn Sudanto, but we're going to try to field questions and it's good to see everyone. And we recognize quite a few of the names showing up on the chat. So just if something comes up or the sound's problematic, just type into the chat and we'll do what we can.
Up the volume a bit is our first.
We can up the volume a bit and speak closer to our mics.
So that's one thing. So let us know if you guys can give like 2 thumbs up or 1 thumb up or something to let us know how the volume is. Is that better? Better for people? Anyone? Perhaps you can't hear us at all. So hopefully you can hear us. We'll try to speak louder. We're closer to the mics now. Not seeing anything. Yes, volume. Okay, even more volume. All right, so they need more volume. Can we do that? Can we give them any more? I think we're at our peak. All right, we'll have to readjust that. We're again still dealing with technicalities. We'll try to get close to the mics here. So if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask. All right, we got some thumbs up. Very good. It's good to know you can hear us. If anybody has any questions they'd like to ask, we can field those. Anything that you'd like to say. We agreed that we would have kind of a talk a bit around the Sabasa Suta and Yoniso Manasikara, if there weren't any questions for people. And I do already have one question here that's anonymous, but anything from anyone? What were you thinking in terms of the Sabasa Sutta? Either of you have any kind of thoughts around your own use of Yoniso Manasikara and how that comes up for you in practice?
Well, maybe just a little bit of an introduction. So the Sabasa Sutta is the second discourse in the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses of the Buddha in Bhikkhu Bodhi's Wisdom Publication edition. It's, I think, about 3 or 4 pages long, so it's not that lengthy. But it's just a great summary of all different ways to practice. I remember Ajahn Tanisara, Ajahn Jeff has written an article called One Tool Among Many, which is really it was my introduction, taking me from, being introduced to meditation into Buddhism through meditation retreats, specifically like, 10-day intensive meditation courses. And then I read his article, which is basically, I think, going over this Sabasa Sutta, like describing, developing the path, doing formal meditation is one way of practice, but other aspects include how we use food, the way we relate to food, the way we relate to clothing, the way we relate to shelter, our restraint, how we use our eyes, how we use our physical bodies in the world, and
also enduring difficulties, enduring just temperature changes, bodily changes, and all kinds of things that are quite difficult, or even ill-spoken words from others.
Yep.
Things like these, which might not even sometimes come up in very comfortable meditation sits, where you don't have to kind of always deal with discomfort. But then there's also avoiding, how we avoid troublesome problems. In the time was like animals and wild areas, unsuitable resorts, things like that.
Cesspits.
Yeah.
Stumps. And
That's right. Brambles,
Yeah.
chasms, and cliffs. So don't do those. Please don't avoid those places. But also associating with bad friends. That's another one. So we're happy to not have that problem here. So that's very lovely.
Yes.
Feels very good to associate with good friends.
You make a good point, though. I mean, reading this sutta, you really get an idea that the Buddha was explaining a path which was over and beyond just one posture. It's not just something we do when we're sitting. It's when we're listening, when we're talking, and all these other aspects of life.
Yeah. And it just points to the fact that there's so many ways to try to develop our practice, and that sometimes we can get quite honed in on just like one way or one thing that I'm going to do. If I just practice anapanasati, breathe in and out, I don't have to think of anything else, and I'll be enlightened. But it just usually doesn't work that way.
Right.
So you have to adapt quite a bit.
So and sabasava translates as all the. Asava is an interesting term. It means either inflows, outflows, cankers, taints, fermentations. It's translated a bunch of different ways, but it refers to the sort of base defilements. I think we have kama asava, like attachment to sensual desire, basically, the taint of sensual desire, the taint of becoming, the taint of ignorance, and then the fourth, which is sometimes included, is the taint of views. And I think the different ways people have translated this is interesting because fermentation has this connotation of sort of it bubbles up and can spread. But yeah, all the different means that the Buddha gives of abandoning them. It's the first one is abandoning through seeing, and I find that's the one that gets a lot of space in the dialogue in the West around just be mindful of what comes up. But the fact that he gives these 6 other ways of dealing with taints is significant, and I think overlooked a lot.
Yeah, it's quite a sutta. I mean, if people can take a look at it,
I put the link there as well.
Yeah, it's quite nice.
Do either of you have a preference for? I mean, Nisabho, I think you named every translation I've ever seen for Asava. Do either of you have a preference, or are you pretty much good with all of them?
I kind of like outflows because it to me it kind of feels like how the mind just goes out, and the tendency that we have to not want to stay in so much. So I really like that the use of that term of outflows. It's kind of like there's just that kind of wanting, getting out, always looking and seeing and using our senses and towards the outside world, and we're rarely kind of inclined, I think, from even birth to want to stay in. It's sort of like, how can I take everything in front of me? It almost seems to be like that desire that we're born with.
I appreciate fermentations because there's the sense of if you have a bottle of a solution with even a little bit, if it's not completely sterile, if there's even a little bit of a fermentation in it, then it will spread within a few days. And for me, there's sometimes that quality to action or speech. It's like, even if there's a sort of smidgen or a small amount of kilesa, then it changes the whole quality of it. And so sometimes it's hard to find that. I know Ajahn Amaro says that you can sometimes see what's sort of the nature of something like a motivation coming up by what voice it has in your head. And either you can sort of listen and hear Mara's voice, which tends to be quite oily, or and Mara is the Buddhist personification of basically death or defilement. or the Buddha's voice, which has a sort of solid and quiet and calm quality. And for me, it's pretty impressive how distinct those two voices are on almost every strong motivation. So I like fermentation because it's, even if there's a little bit, it seems to change everything. And for me, that's the experience with the taints too. There's a pretty strong divide between the two.
Yeah.
Ajahn Kovilo?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't really have a preference, but just because I think for each one of those translations, there, like a good case can be made for them, like outflows. I mean, I really, can feel that. I was talking about this with a Zen monk, this discourse, and talking about this word asava, and he was saying that in the Zen tradition, they use the word leakages. You're like leaking out of your different sense organs. You're leaking out of your eyes. You're leaking out of your ears, and yeah, I can literally feel it. Just kind of the draining away of some kind of essence. And sometimes they talk about like chi energy, even kind of leaking. But then also, yeah, with the effluence, I mean, it comes up in the Buddhist discourses, specifically like the Vinaya and the monks' rules about alcohol. The same word asava is used in relation to like different types of alcohol, like
Palasava is fruit wine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And also, like one thing to think of as well is like fermentation. That word is, it kind of, you think of fermenting as something that's like it's getting worse. I mean, sometimes when it's used with food, it's something that people appreciate in certain countries. Something ferments, but for the most part, if something's fermenting, it's kind of it's not necessarily a beautiful image. You could, to see it as like alcohol, like something's getting richer or better, but it's not. That's not my sense of how fermentation is being used. So it's like a darkening or progression that I don't see as something that's positive.
So we have a few questions coming up.
Yeah.
Since we're doing online retreats at home these days, asks Ruby, could you talk about using the sutta during retreat, not just during sitting meditation? And it feels to me like seeing must precede the other approaches. Ajahn Cunda, do you have a response on either of those or something relevant to them?
Well, the second part around seeing, that is the actual the one that comes first. So after you have the explanation of yoni so manasikara, then you have taints to be abandoned by seeing. And for many of us, just even for me, the idea of sight is something that human beings, I think, are so they tend to be so geared towards. It's like and I can see that at least in my own life. Others, maybe that's not the sense that takes them, but it seems to me that sight around people or food or whatever it is really can ignite that fire. So when I think about seeing, it's like that's kind of a metaphor for that particular sense. But in terms of the sutta, it's like what's unfit for attention, so that sensual desire doesn't arise. And so we're trying to actually bring that up in our mind. This isn't just focusing on the breath, or there's, it's not like a technique of concentration. There's a reflection there. So in terms of using that during like retreat, I think actually kind of questioning yourself, like, where is sensual desire arising right now? Because during retreat, it comes up all the time in your mind. You might have your eyes closed, or you might be thinking about some food or a person, or wanting something to be better, or even wanting better mind states. It could be anything like that. So that's kind of what we're seeing is unfit for attention. That sort of focusing or honing in on sensual desire, on senses. But we also have like being and ignorance, and so the Buddha's really opening that up to all possibilities of what you're seeing. One of the things I think on retreat that happens is we get quite focused on this sense of concentration, and so the Sabasa Sutta is really opening us up to like, wait a minute, there's so much more going on here than just bringing your mind to a focus. But without focus, without actually concentrating the mind, without bringing it, bringing it in, honing it in, then you don't really have the potential to focus on all of these things, because the mind is too wild. It needs to be, sort of tamed a little bit like a wild animal.
Good answer.
Yeah.
You know, I really Ajahn Kovilo?
Yeah, I think it's a good answer. I mean, on retreat, yeah, the kind of three main asavas, which both of you have touched on, you know, which are mentioned in this sutta, like the kamasava, the taint or the defilement of sensuality, the defilement of becoming, and the defilement of ignorance are the ones highlighted in this discourse. And yeah, on retreat, I mean, you can certainly see all of those probably every day of a retreat, but maybe especially the becoming, you know, towards the middle or the end of a retreat, like kind of, you know, you've been working up this becoming, you know, before you get to the retreat. You're like, okay, I'm going to be this meditator. I'm going to go on this retreat. Yep. Then you get on the retreat and you kind of are just there with that. But then, you know, say if it's a 7 or a 10-day retreat, by day 2 or 3, you're already starting to become after, what am I going to do after this retreat?
Yeah, or I'm such a bad meditator and I should be better.
Exactly, that's like the anti-becoming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to look at them through, because it's such a broad net, that for me during retreat, thinking about it in terms of specifically breath meditation, and I think breath meditation gets taught in the West frequently, almost exclusively in terms of the first method of abandoning the asavas, just seeing, like, watch the breath come in and out, and the mind will naturally gather. But for me, there's a lot of ways of using the breath with the other means, specifically the means of developing, which is the final one. And in terms of really cultivating bright perceptions or ways of playing with the breath and the breath energy, which sort of need it through the body. Tanpor Lee, Ajahn Jeff, Longpor Suchito all really speak about visualizing the breath energy, maybe like coursing down the spine, or sort of as light coming in and out of the body. And that way of developing a bright state with the breath, not just watching the breath, but really actively engaging with it. I think that's a pretty effective way for Westerners to become engaged with the breath, because you can really get a sense of pleasure going. And similarly with enduring, or avoiding rather, I think some people, if you've had trauma, sometimes that trauma can be kind of contained in the body and in certain places or certain knots. And to know that you don't necessarily have to go right to those spots or to pain if it's coming up, but you can actually avoid those spots until you have pleasure somewhere else. And then, like, once you have a safe sanctuary in some part of the body, like the heart or, the chest or something, then you can slowly approach those spots from a position of strength with the breath energy. So, yeah, I think sort of narrowing it down a bit to how you use it in breath meditation can be quite helpful.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there's, as you were talking about, there's times when you do need to retreat, like something's too difficult, traumas or just some pain in the body. And the enduring might not be just to kind of focus and be with that pain, but it might also be what Venerable Nisabho was talking about, like actually being aware of pleasure that you can find in the body, pleasure that you can find in your breath or your experience. And then you essentially can spread that around. You can move that. I think any of you are familiar with Ajahn Jeff, whose name has been mentioned. That's a method, and I've used that many times and I'm amazed when I do have very strong pain or difficulty in the body, that if I actually, if I'm having difficulty focusing by being with that pain, then I just go to pleasantness, and that immediately can drop that down and makes it very bearable. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes more pleasant. The meditation becomes pleasant, and that shouldn't be underrated. Is the pleasant side of meditation. People should think about that and bring that up a lot. It's supposed to be pleasant.
This gets overlooked a lot.
I think. It does get overlooked.
This is miserable.
This dreary experience, this miserable experience.
But there's also like a skill in that pleasure. Like you brought up, like endurance, like having to endure like painful feeling. That's
Yeah,
something
yeah.
which, I mean, you really have to experiment with, like enduring painful feeling, like how much is useful versus am I actually, putting strain on my knee in a way which could actually hurt myself. But also on the side of pleasure, like it's, I've heard various teachers talk about enduring pleasure and getting skill in, not getting lost by pleasure, because pleasure by its nature is very enjoyable.
Yeah.
And you start having very nice states, and it's easy for the mind to just kind of wander off, and enduring it is like, staying with the causes, staying with the breath, or, just getting intelligent about the way that we relate to the pleasure that we're creating.
It's interesting. How do you think about enduring pleasure? Because for me, I think I could understand it, but for me, the sense of enduring would, it'd be more of really like kind of trying to not get lost, but then not get lost in the pleasure, but using it for a intentional purpose, so that one isn't kind of getting caught into pain. For me, it's more down the line that I usually tend to get lost in non-sensual. Like if there's pleasure going on, then and it's non-sensual, then like something with pleasure and meditation. It's not so often that I experience that and I'm getting lost in it, but I could see that if that happened a lot,
Right.
If one was just kind of having pleasant meditations all the time, then you could easily
Exactly.
get lost.
Hopefully people are experiencing so
It'd be
much
nice
pleasure
to
that
be-
you're getting lost in it.
Yeah,
And if
or
so,
even
then-
attached at first. And
Yeah.
you can let go of that part later.
Well, even just the subtle like slipping away from the object of meditation. I mean, I think that's the interesting thing about the Anapanasati Sutta is you have all 16 steps, and in it, you're paying attention to the breath, and then you're watching, piti or rapture arise, and then sukha. But in every one of those steps, the refrain is always breathing in, he knows, or
Yeah.
breathing out, he knows. Like the proximate cause of all those arising of pleasure and contemplation and awareness is you're tethering your awareness to the breath. So I think it's no accident that begins every step of the Anapanasati Sutta, is that you always have to have the breath there, sort of like one foot in either camp, of the breath, but then so you don't totally just drift into the pleasure. And I don't find it is usually like this full-on drifting. It's just a sort of steady blurring of the edges. And I think that clarity that the breath allows is the important thing to kind of anchor yourself to throughout, maybe, something like that.
And it's a great point with the Anapanasati Sutta that it's just continually breathing in, breathing out, and then he experiences, just fill in the blank, rapture, pleasure, and then if you can easily see if the mind doesn't, isn't with the breath, then it just does go off. It doesn't really, it can't really stay anchored. But if you keep staying with the breath and still experiencing these other things, it's not like they're mutually exclusive. Like the breath just has to be your one experience of it. You have multiple experiences, and hopefully they're skillful. Yeah. Shall we start a question? Would that be good? 'Cause
Sure.
This
Yeah,
is
and-
also a good question I noticed.
And discussion people or people on the chat can feel free to type more questions as well. We'll try to, answer and look at who's asking. All right.
So I have a question here, and this was I went to a study Dhamma group where a teacher of the group was sharing the story, and I found two mistakes. This was a story from the suttas, and felt the need to point it out. And I did it individually after the session. So this person did actually go and point these things out after hearing the teacher misquote something from a sutta. And this person said, I sometimes struggle with this quote unquote, I know better, or I am right, this kind of attitude that I feel is justified. In this particular case, because I had studied those suttas directly in Pali and even remember the verses. But I also feel embarrassed to have this kind of attitude and feel that often it is not necessary or helpful to correct others. And it has a sense of strengthening a sense of self. I can notice that it is just a thought, but I still cannot let go. I was wondering if you have any advice, which is a great question, I think.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to think about mistakes of others and what they do. This kind of our mind can naturally go there, I think. But what were your thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, the kind of pull or the urge, kind of, this is maybe a different type of asava, not mentioned in the sutta, but which Nisabho brought up is kind of like ditthi or view, like the effluent or the outflow of views. Like I have this view, and it could be right. The suttas talk about right view and wrong view, or views which are in balance with the way things are, and views which aren't. And yeah, and it's especially difficult when we're right,
Yeah,
and it's that righteous indignation. And I think, I mean, I was certainly raised in a community, a culture, friends, people close to me who really that's a value, being able to stick to your guns and being able to really not back down when you know what you're right about. And there might there can be a place for that, but I think one really has to be in touch with what one's motives are, in addition to whether or not one's right or wrong. And especially if you're going to talk to someone, you have to, is this the right time to bring it up?
Yeah.
Am I the right person to bring it up? Can this person actually hear this? All these other questions in addition to just is it factual or not?
And there's that's a really good point in that part of the monk's code is before we admonish another monk, we have to have 5 conditions met, and these are really powerful. It's one of my favorite parts of the code, actually. Tell me if I'm missing some, but we have to come from a heart of loving kindness. We have to speak truthfully. It has to be timely. We have to ask for permission. And do we have to be free from fault ourselves?
You have to reflect on that, right?
Yeah.
You have to reflect on it.
You
have to be free of the...
Okay.
Am I free?
Did I miss one? There's iterations of this list.
I think there are 2 different lists.
Yeah, exactly. It always confuses me.
One
okay.
is reflection.
This is a classic monk confusion.
And one is what you put in front of yourself is qualifies for your actually doing it. And the other is kind of a reflection. You ask yourself.
Yeah. And
whether you're free of certain things or whether you're,
Right.
And I find it's really, self-righteousness is perhaps one of the most powerful mind states or ways of self coming up. I think it says something that of the different fetters that are abandoned, like sensuality and stuff are abandoned at lower levels of awakening, but that of sort of conceit and things are abandoned only at arahantship. And so there's something really primal about the feeling like I am right, and these rules that make you stop and make sure you're actually coming from a place of loving kindness, really, they're extremely helpful in community. And I know Ajahn Amro's spoken about, I think at one point he had to wait a year before he admonished a monk because he had to wait until he had a heart of loving kindness, and he just had to wait. And I think it's true, speaking of the translation of asava as fermentation, and that even if you have a little speck of a taint in your intention, then it changes everything. I think admonishing or speaking with someone about a difficulty is the perfect example, because if there's even a little bit of anger, it changes everything. The heart can't be open and accusative simultaneously at all. They're just completely different realms. And so, those 5 rules in terms of checking that impulse towards self-righteousness have been very helpful for me.
Can I ask a follow-up question of both of you? So that's great. If we can totally wait a year and, before we admonish this person because we've got a little bit of anger, that's great. But if we can't,
you've got 9 months left, Kovilo.
That's right.
Yeah. But if we can't, if we have to, it's part of our job, and say we're like a manager, and there's someone who's working for us that,
Or an abbot, or
yeah, exactly. I'm
senior
not
monk.
Yeah.
Or even in this case, like actually, let's say it was like really wrong Dhamma, like it was actually suggesting, like, let's say something like, oh well, there are cases where killing somebody would be a good idea, and obviously that's not what the Buddha teaches.
Right.
So there are certain things also in terms of Dhamma that would require us to act quickly.
Yeah. So what do you guys have skillful means about how to do that? Say there is a little bit of anger, but we see it, and there are good and bad intentions. It's mixed. So are there any skillful means about how to avoid eschew the bad and just cultivate and kind of speak from the good, even though the bad's still there?
That's a very good question, because it's quite difficult if you're actually required to act on something and you may not have a chance to do so in the future. And if you always have a chance to do something like that in the future, then it's quite helpful to have that pause, to have that wait, because just the anger comes out. People know it, and it's very difficult for anybody to receive anything when you're actually like angry with them, or you're saying something out of annoyance, or even just your righteousness around a view can feel like anger. Wow, this person's really attached to this view, even if you're right, and we're always right. So that's the problem. Is we almost always think we're right when we have these kind of things. So it's quite difficult when you're in a timely approach and you have to manage your own emotional state that isn't is going to be kind of possibly coming off as unskillful. So waiting, I think, is always good, but there's honesty as well, just to say to a person, look, I want to talk to you right now about something, but I'm not in the greatest state to say it to you, but I don't think there's another chance that I'll be able to actually bring it up to you again, or that right now it's the time to do it, because you might repeat the same mistake in a few minutes and lose a finger or whatever. So if you're on the job using some sort of some finger chopping machinery, so there's some times where we do that, or even we act in a fierce way, but maybe it appears angry. So we do have to actually just kind of take the bulls by the bull by the horns, and deal with those kind of problems. But it's not pleasant, and we have to be careful.
Yeah,
I agree. Ajahn Kovilo?
Well, he was asking the question.
No, I mean, I agree, and I think in Thailand they're very skillful about this, because there's a lot more. It's just there's more nuance there frequently. So, you can ask someone else to speak to the person for you, or you can phrase it not. Just the word admonishment is really problematic, and if you can get yourself to a genuine place of inquiry where you're really like asking them about their story, I find that's one of the powerful qualities of this whole teaching on dependent origination and how people got to how they are, is that when you hear someone's backstory, almost always the self-righteousness and the anger will fade. And I think it's an interesting way of using the Four Noble Truths in an external sense as well, is that if all you see is the problem and the sankhara and the neuroses, then it's easy to be angry. But as soon as you trace back the neuroses to the dukkha that gave rise to it, or the trauma or the loss that made someone like they are, that's where everything else dissolves, and you're back in a place of compassion. So I think a good route, if you're really struggling with someone, either before admonishing, speaking to them, or just in general, is really trying to trace back the whole mess to the initial wound. And I think that's how you can apply the Four Noble Truths in external life. And really, for me, it works. I mean, I think the Buddha was extremely wise in establishing suffering as the starting point for his teaching, because it's what binds us all in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's that common story that's often missed, is like that essentially we're all very similar to each other, and we carry the same problems and difficulties around. And when we have a view like you're speaking about, where you're just approaching someone, you tend to dehumanize them. You make them oftentimes less than what you are. And so it's that sense of like, oh, wait a minute, I can make the same mistake. Possibly what they're doing is something that is easy to understand if I could get clear on who they are and what they are. And so those things, they just soften the touch. So maybe you can short circuit that anger quickly if you kind of check in to you register into your own, like, oh wait, we're kind of possibly the same, and you start tuning into like, how can do I make those same mistakes? And like, well, actually, I think I was told I misquoted a sutta yesterday. Oh, I forgot about that. So it's it's quite easy to kind of try to bring it up in yourself, because if we look quite clearly at our own behavior, we can say, oh, we're pretty much the same. We make the same mistakes. And one of the things though is you gotta ask yourself if it's worth it. Like in a situation like this, I don't think it's always really beneficial. That's the question, around the benefit of it. Have you both had times when you found it unbeneficial to give people feedback? Yeah.
For me, it's almost always. I mean, if I'm coming from that place of anger, there's almost, or even righteousness, or especially anger mixed with righteousness is like a horrible.
It's a nice cocktail.
Couple. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Tag team.
It's like an acid bath or something.
And then pretty much always have regret about it. And at monasteries, we have time to dwell on our regrets. So
a lot of time.
It's horrible. But,
a lot of time to sit there and then apologize to the person later.
Exactly. That's another great thing about a monastery, is that we're kind of looking forward to, or there's a culture of checking in and apology. And,
reconciliation.
Reconciliation, very much so. People are open to it, and people don't want to dwell on these things, but
because you see it's painful to kind of keep, and then if you keep doing it, it's even worse. You keep kind of shooting yourself. There's a metaphor around when you're pointing the finger at someone, you're pointing the finger, but there's three pointing back at you.
Right.
So you're not actually seeing that you're harming yourself, or that you're also
like that.
Have the same problems within yourself. So it's a good metaphor to think about that.
Yeah, and I think also the deeper you get into this sort of circles of Kalyana Mitta, of spiritual friendship, the less you have to worry about. Usually if you're silent around these things and are setting it a good example, people pick up on their foibles quite quickly. Usually waiting 2 or 3 times until someone slipped up a little bit and it's really obvious their mindfulness isn't catching it before you say something. Frequently it's just, the deeper you get into these communities or people are practicing together, I think the more you can kind of trust everyone's intention and mindfulness. And just to, use that to speak to also, the chat stream's quite vibrant with people, greeting each other. And we have 53 viewers right now altogether, but it's, even virtually, during the time of pandemic, it's pretty, just not to underestimate the value of this sort of spiritual friendship, that it's much less fragile than those friendships in the world, which are based on how well you get along with someone, because we're all kind of bound by this goal and this right view. So, in a normal friendship, if you admonish someone for something, it's, who knows what's going to come of it. But usually within, with spiritual friends, like all the names that are showing up, it's really something to rejoice in, that there's sincere practitioners available, even virtually. So we're quite grateful to be stepping into a community that's already here, and we're also kind of nervous. So,
Well, I've got a follow-up question. We were thinking might go to 7:45 or so, but we can.
Just go with the flow.
Go with the flow. But one follow-up question is maybe for you, Nisabho, and your thoughts on how the one being admonished might skillfully respond.
I think, the Buddha always speaks about how you should look at one admonishing you. And granted, the word admonish is problematic in many ways. I think offering feedback or asking about something is probably a better way to approach it. But even if someone's admonishing you in the worst sense, or the harshest sense, in an extremely unskillful way, the Buddha says you should approach it as you would, or approach that person as one would approach someone showing them buried treasure. And I think really listening to the feedback and trying to take it as such, at the very least, it's a chance to be humble and to practice patience and restraint, even if what they're saying is couched in extremely bad language, or is wrong. One can take it as a teaching. So that's my sense. I certainly have found, if you're really open and acknowledge certain aspects of an admonishment, whether or not it's all right, the other person, there's a chance to establish a genuine connection with the other person over time. I know that Richard Rohr said that before you're 30 years old, it's useful to get all these successes to like build up your ego structure a bit. But after 30, basically the best way you learn, or the only way he's learned, is just by failing again and again. And there's something to be, it's a bit of an overstatement, but something about being admonished is a chance to step into that space of humility, I think. What are your thoughts?
There's kind of the corollary to the discourse that you brought up about like the 5 recollections before you give feedback. And there are 2 things which you should keep in mind while you're receiving feedback. The first is the truth. So you're paying attention, this person, is what they're saying actually accurate? And the second one is not being provoked. So you're telling me all this stuff and I want to strangle you, but
not going to be provoked.
Not going to, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
True.
You're not going to strangle them.
Not going to strangle them.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect that why it's so hard to receive feedback, to have somebody criticize us is just around our sense of self. And it's just a wonderful opportunity to see like, oh, I'm suffering now because I have attachment to me, to who I am as a solid, permanent person. And if you kind of reflect on that, it's hard to in the moment, but it's like, well, what part of me is angry at this other person? What, where am I in all of this that has this justification of anger, or whatever's arising? And if you can stay with that sense of self, then you do actually have a possibility of staying with the mind, to stay very clear with what someone's saying, because you're seeing very clearly, oh, this anger is arising out of my own attachment to what I am, that I'm a person who doesn't get criticized, that I'm not worthy of criticism, because we kind of take it so personally. Whether this means, if somebody tells me, I didn't clean up the crumbs on the table or whatever, then we think, not that ever happens, but
that was today.
But like we think like I'm a person who doesn't do that. I have this view of myself as somebody who's really clean, and I've just been told I'm not clean, so therefore I'm a bad person, and I'm who is this person to give me feedback or admonish me or tell me something like this? How dare they? But instead, if it's more like, oh wow, I'm really upset about some breadcrumbs, then it can kind of be a real rising to a joy and seeing like, oh, I've actually caught something. I've seen a defilement very clearly, right. My own attachment to self. And the other person too, when they're giving feedback, also can hopefully catch themselves when they're doing it. Like, oh wait, even if you're in the middle of it, just to oh wow, there's some anger here. Right. Or to start with, as we were talking about starting the conversation, like when you question whether you should start the conversation or not, it should also bring back that self, because as the original question had asked, it was about like how I feel, I'm right and this person's wrong, and I know better than them, and I need to show them, what's wrong with them, or what they're doing wrong, and I have to correct them because they're wrong, and I'm going to show them that they are wrong and I'm right. And as soon as we get caught into that, it's quite it can be a difficult tangle.
And I think that there's something to be said for the Buddha in the Awada Patimokkha, which is the succinct teaching, which he characterizes the heart of his teaching. He talks about patience being the ultimate incinerator of defilement. And I think just relying on that sometimes is necessary, where you're not in a good space being admonished, but just not saying anything is so frequently the right thing to do. Like silence is almost never wrong, at least in the moment, and you can always respond later. But and there's also something to be said for the fact that the Brahma Viharas, the 4 boundless abodes, are that adjective of boundless. I think is a really interesting one, because for me, if it speaks to this fact that if you are cultivating metta, loving kindness, compassion, gladness, and equanimity, even during a brief period in your day, like 10 minutes very intentionally, in the evening or in the morning, it really does seep into everything. And it seems to me boundless in that sense that even if you aren't able to bring metta into your response to someone's admonishment, if you can put aside 10 minutes of a day to really actively cultivate metta and bring your awareness to your heart, then you'll find all of these moments do seem to kind of hit more softly. And yeah, the boundless abodes seem to be boundless in that sense to me as well.
I think that one of the things I was just realizing, though, is how this sense of needing to correct somebody is so pervasive right now. Politically, people are just getting into a lot of problems with their own self-righteousness and thinking my way is correct. And I've been reflecting a lot around how, with a sense of metta and with a sense of this caring for other people, that you can. I would say we should, as human beings, be able to try to communicate with other people who have different views from us. And what's sad now is that it's becoming sort of an accepted norm that that's not done. That no, I can't talk to these people anymore. They've lost it. They're off the they're in some other world, and I have no possibility of even engaging with them. And that's quite sad, because then you have this sense of me and them developed where we've made it an impossibility of trying to understand what we started with, which was how to see that other human beings are similar to us. I don't think there's that many differences that many of us have. We all have the same needs. We have the same needs for happiness. People have the same needs for cleanliness. They might figure out those needs in different ways, but they still have a need. So if we can kind of try to figure out what we have in common, then it's a much more beautiful approach to trying to understand each other, and then I think we won't be fighting so much. So it's that heart of metta is so important.
Agreed, Ajahn.
Yeah.
You have a good one with us.
Yeah.
Agree.
We are coming towards the end of our time.
Yeah.
What are your feelings, Venerables?
I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah, it's great to see everybody.
Yeah. We get to see the live chat here, so it's really nice.
That's right. We don't actually see any people.
No.
See little icons.
Well, we see your little icons there, so that's nice. I think we could wrap it up. So it's been nice. This is our first live stream. Went better than expected, and so
it's not over yet.
Happy to. Yeah, it's not over yet. Something can still happen. But it's been quite lovely. I'm happy to have these dear friends with me. It was really nice. I didn't mention that I'll be at the Hermitage till early July, so I'll be here the longest and looking after the Hermitage while Ajahn Siddhanto is on sabbatical, and so that's why he's not actually here on the live stream, because he's at Abhayagiri now for the next few months, and I'm going to be looking after his duties until July, and he'll probably remain on sabbatical for the entirety of 2021. But most of that will be here.
Oh, and actually, Ajahn Siddhanta just chimed in on the live chat, so everyone can say hello to Ajahn, who is the nexus of this whole scene.
Yeah, so
and
he started this.
Very much like to have him here.
Very good. Didn't know he was listening.
We're taking good care of the place, Ajahn.
Yeah, we're taking good care of the place. Only half the house is burned down, so no, that's not true.
It's not true.
Not yet. So yeah, it was really nice to be here with everyone, and it's nice living with these two fine fellows. We do have an announcement, though. We already have a change for how we're gonna be, just the time, and so We just thought it'd be easier to knock this time back a half an hour. So we're going to start at 6:30 p.m. on Tuesdays from now on, and that'll be announced on the website, and I think on whatever announcements go out to the group. So it'll be 6:30 p.m. on Tuesdays and 7 o'clock a.m. on Fridays. So those will be the two times. So you can think of, if it's 6:30, then it's the p.m., and if it's 7, then it's the a.m.
And if you get confused, the Pacific Hermitage calendar will have not only the announcements for each live stream, but also the link to this YouTube.
Yeah.
And we'll also post that. And do either of you, Venerables, would it be good to initiate the Sabasa Suta again for next Friday as a possible starting point, or is there any other recommendation for?
We can. The other thing is for people to also have some questions ready. That's very helpful. I saw that the chat opened up before we started, and so if you all have questions for us, that's quite helpful to talk about. Have some topics to talk about.
And type them in right off the bat, and then we'll have something to go off.
And then we'll have something to go off. So as you can see, like even just one question can prompt quite a lot of discussion.
I think it's a good idea to just have Sabasa there in the background as a
we can have Yoni
floater.
Somanisika and Sabasa Sutta in the background.
So that once again, that's Majjhima Nikaya 2, and I posted the link up above, and I'll post it again.
All right.
So.
Let me just say hi to Ajahn Jodhipalo as well.
Oh, Ajahn Jodhipalo.
There as well. Okay, very good to see you. All right. Well, I think that can wrap up our live stream for tonight. So it was nice being with everyone and being with my two Venerable brothers here. So